Want to teach your kids financial literacy, but not sure where to start? Greenlight can help. With Greenlight, parents can keep an eye on kids' spending and saving, while kids and teens use a card of their own to build money confidence. As a parent, you can send instant money transfers, set up chores, automate allowance, and more. It's a convenient way to run your household, customized to your family's needs, and the easy way to raise financially smart kids. Get started with Greenlight today and get your first month free at greenlight.com/Spotify.
Support for this podcast comes from CDTA, The Eagle, a Times Union podcast driven by CDTA. We're back with a midsummer episode of The Eagle, a Times Union podcast. I'm Jessica Marshall. The reason that The Eagle has taken a few weeks off here and there is because we've been hard at work on a new limited series podcast. It's called Catastrophic Failure. Times Union reporter Larry Rulison and I have spent the last year taking a deep dive into the story of the Schoharie Limo Crash that killed 20 people on October 6th, 2018. We've produced 10 episodes that delve into what led to the crash, the investigation, the trial of Nauman Hussein, and how something like this tragedy can be prevented in the future. It wasn't an easy series to produce. A lot of thought and resources and emotion went into it. And it's not an easy listen either. There are many moments in this series when the things we talk about may be triggering or upsetting to hear. But it's an important story. It's one of the most important that we've ever told at the Times Union. We hope you'll give it a listen. The first episode premieres Tuesday, July 30th. You can listen at timesunion.com or wherever you get your podcasts. We are going to play a part of the first episode now on The Eagle.
At approximately 1:55 p.m., Schoharie County Sheriff's Office and New York State Police Patrols responded to a motor vehicle crash at the intersection of State Route 30 and State Route 30A in the town of Schoharie. In total, 20 victims were killed. All were adults.
It was one of the deadliest ground transportation disasters in U.S. history. The limousine crash that killed 20 people in upstate New York on October 6, 2018. I'm Jessica Marshall. In this podcast from the Times Union, reporter Larry Rulison and I are going to go back and look at the circumstances surrounding this devastating crash and attempt to unravel a very complicated story.
People looked at me and said, "How did they all die? Are you kidding me? Did you see that limo?"
Well, this was certainly one of the most egregious cases of what I'm going to call intentional disregard for human life.
It's a story of tragedy and loss, of negligence and consequence. But more than anything else, it's a story of catastrophic failure.
Things should have never been on the road to begin with.
The owner of the limousine company was a former FBI informant.
We just want the truth to come out.
Episode 1, The Crash. There are going to be times in this podcast series when we're going to talk about topics or describe situations that may be triggering, disturbing, and inappropriate for younger listeners. We will warn you ahead of these moments, but please use your discretion and listen with care. Let's begin this story on October 6th, 2018. It's not the beginning of this story, but it's where we need to begin this podcast. For many people in this corner of the world, It's a day they remember clearly. Kind of like you remember exactly where you were and what you were doing on September 11th, 2001, if you were around back then. You remember because something indescribably awful happened. A tragedy of epic proportions. A disaster with an aftershock that will ripple across generations. October 6th, 2018, was a beautiful autumn day in upstate New York. It was a pleasant 68 degrees, partly sunny. The leafy and pastoral stretch of New York country was just starting to show the season's color. I'm going to start here with my memory of that day. I was in Schoharie County visiting a pumpkin farm. I left that farm around 2 p.m., and I took Country Route 30A back to the highway, where I was heading back to Albany. It's about as country a road as you'll find in this region. Quiet, winding, picturesque. And as I drove, I marveled at the blazing colors of upstate New York in the fall. If you ask me, it's one of the most beautiful places in the world at this time of year. As I approached the entrance to I-88, I saw flashing lights. I saw a lot of them. New York State Police had completely blocked the bridge that ran over the 4-lane highway. On the other side, the road leads into the small town of Schoharie. There were multiple police and emergency vehicles with lights flashing. Something was really wrong here. I wondered what was going on. I found out later that afternoon after I'd gotten home. I had been less than a mile down the road from the scene of one of the deadliest ground transportation disasters in U.S. history. For Jerry Bersessi and her husband Sam, October 6th, 2018 started out as a pretty normal Saturday.
So we were planning a big dinner Saturday. We always used to have dinners at our house.
Jerry and Sam are an active and gregarious pair. They finish each other's sentences, and they love to entertain at their home in the small town of Florida, New York. So when their oldest daughter said she was coming to town for a visit from Florida, the state, not to be confused with the town, she says they planned a big family dinner.
Sam called Savannah and said, hey, can you come to the house Saturday night for dinner? Me and Diego are going to be there. We'll have a good time.
They invited their youngest daughter, 24-year-old Savannah Bersessi, to join them as well. Savannah lived nearby with her boyfriend, 27-year-old Matthew Coons. But Savannah told her dad and stepmom she couldn't make it.
All we knew was that it was a birthday party and that she couldn't make it, so we were going to hook up with her probably on Sunday.
When your children reach a certain age, you stop asking all these detailed questions.
Yeah, she was living on her own.
She's 24 years old.
Right,
you don't need to tell me where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, you can't make it, you can't make it. So, yeah.
Mary and Kyle Ashton passed that Saturday in a similar way. They live in Winterport, Maine, where they moved 20 years ago to live their dream of running a bed and breakfast. They didn't know what their son, Michael Ukai, was up to that day. But October 6th was his birthday, his 34th birthday.
Kyle and I were in our parlor watching TV, just having a regular old Saturday. And I said, oh, geez, we should really call Michael for his birthday. So we called the home phone, left a message, and thought nothing of it.
Kevin Cushing spent that Saturday morning going through his garage in Saratoga Springs. He was looking for furniture for his 31-year-old son Patrick's new apartment. Patrick was moving in with his girlfriend, 26-year-old Amanda Halse. They were moving into an apartment in downtown Albany.
So we had a nice day. I mean, talked to Pat, helped him get his house together, and went down into the garage and pulled some stuff together that we thought he might like.
In the afternoon, Kevin and his wife Sue headed out to have lunch with their older son. They texted Patrick along the way to tell them what they'd found in the garage. They promised to figure out the details of any furniture handoffs later.
I don't think he mentioned he was going out, but he wouldn't. I mean, he does what he's going to do.
Janet Steenberg, on the other hand, knew exactly what two of her sons, 29-year-old Axel and 34-year-old Rich, were doing that day. Axel had planned a big birthday outing for his new wife, Amy. She was turning 30, and 17 of their family members and friends got into a white Ford Excursion stretch limousine at their house in Amsterdam, New York, around noon. Then they got on their way to Omegang Brewery, about 50 miles away in Cooperstown. They were going to do a beer tasting birthday party.
And then Axel and Amy invited us to go. But I was like, I don't want to take a seat from someone. I'm not really that much into the drinking, so I didn't want to take a seat to go party with everybody when I'm not going to drink, So we didn't go.
What all 4 sets of these families did not know, along with more than a dozen other families, was that this October Saturday was going to upend their lives. It was the day their worst nightmares came true. Dan Bogan was driving to a family wedding in Schoharie that afternoon. He and his pregnant wife and young son pulled into the parking lot at the Apple Barrel Country Store off of Route 30A around 1:30 p.m. They'd been traveling in tandem with his wife's family from their home in Rensselaer County, which was about an hour away.
We parked, we went in, we ordered sandwiches.
The family agreed to stop there to stretch their legs and grab a bite to eat before they headed to their hotel in the town to get ready for the wedding. The Apple Barrel's main parking lot was pretty full at that time, which is a normal occurrence on a fall Saturday. So the family had to park their cars on the fringe of the property, on a grassy patch of land adjacent to a ravine in the woods that edged one side of the property.
Because my dog was in the back of our car and it was a hot day, we parked on the trees and had windows down, and I went out and I got him out of the car and he went into the ravine where all of this happened, and he's a lab, so he laid down in the water. I mean, it's just such a memorable part of the experience leading up to this life-changing incident.
I want to pause here for a second to explain the geography a little bit more, because the geography is so important in what happens next. The Apple Barrel Country Store and Restaurant is on Route 30A. The building is just a few yards southeast of a 3-way intersection between Routes 30 and 30A. The edge of its parking lot, where Dan Bogan and his family parked their cars, lines up roughly with the intersection. Route 30A is a flat road. Route 30 is on a hill, and where the bottom of that hill meets that flat road is the intersection. This is where I'm going to bring in Times Union reporter Larry Rulison. You will hear a lot from him in this podcast. He's going to explain the geography a little bit more.
It's called a T intersection.
It's a one-way stop sign, right? The stop sign is just when you're coming kind of southwest down 30 and you hit 30A, you're going to stop for a stop sign, but there are no stop signs on 30A going in either direction.
Exactly.
So on the other side of 30A is just, kind of a grassy patch and a ravine, right? Can you kind of describe that?
When you come down to the intersection, the apple barrel is really, off to your left a bit. So when you're looking straight ahead, what you see is sort of like parts of their parking lot, and then there's this ravine with like some fencing around it and woods. So, I mean, you might not realize what's straight ahead, but it is a ditch.
Okay, let's go back to Dan Bogan now. On October 6th, 2018, he was in the parking lot of the Apple Barrel Country Store in Schoharie around 1:50 p.m. A few minutes later, his family came back to their cars, and they all started to pack up to leave. What happened next is something that Dan has never talked about publicly.
I've described it before as like, I just saw a meteor fall out of the sky and just blow up. It was this explosion of energy.
While Dan Bogan was standing on the edge of the Apple Barrel parking lot at 1:55 p.m. that day, Holly Wood and her 25-year-old daughter were in their car on Route 30. They'd just pulled up to the stop sign at the intersection between 30 and 30A, and they were waiting to turn left onto 30A. They'd just dropped off some pet food at a local animal shelter, and they were heading to a fall festival that was about 8 miles away. They wanted to make the most of the beautiful fall weather.
So we're going to make a couple hours out of the day just because it was a nice day and everything. And as soon as we hit Route 7 and 30, it changed the whole outcome.
It has taken Holly Wood more than 5 years to speak publicly about what happened next. But first, we need to rewind a few minutes. Holly and her daughter were driving south along Route 30. Bear with us as we describe this traffic route, as it can get kind of complicated if you're not looking at a map. They stopped at a traffic light at the intersection of Route 7 and Route 30. That's about 2 miles northeast of the Apple Barrel. As they were waiting at a stoplight, a white Ford Excursion limousine coming west on Route 7 took a right onto Route 30 in front of them. It was traveling slowly. And when the light turned, Holly found herself directly behind it.
They were going really slow and they were toward the side of the road. They weren't like driving in the actual driving lane. They were more pulled off toward the side of the road, driving really slow.
Holly says she also noticed at this time that the limo's reverse lights were on, as if they were backing up, but they were still traveling forward.
I asked my daughter, I said, do you hear that noise? And my window was open a little ways. And I was like, it sounds like a backup alarm. And so I was like, I have no idea what is going on. And they were driving really slow still. So we're like, are they sightseeing? And we didn't know really what was going on.
About 230 yards down the road, they came to the bridge over Interstate 88. Holly says the limo moved over to the shoulder just before crossing the bridge.
There were 2 cars coming up the hill, so I couldn't go around. So I waited, I just stopped, and then he pulled back out and headed across the I-88 bridge, and they were going really slow, and so I was like, okay, now what's going on? Because they're not even picking up speed. This is ridiculous. And so once they got over the bridge, he pulled over again over the white line and didn't come to a complete stop. He just kept rolling forward a little bit. So when the 2 cars passed, I passed around them.
If circumstances that day had been different, Holly Wood and her daughter may have gone to that fall festival. They may have had a lovely afternoon, and they may never have thought of that odd limo that they passed ever again. If things had gone another way entirely, they might not have been alive to talk to us for this podcast. But neither of those scenarios played out in reality. Instead, Holly says, the specter of that white limo has haunted her daily for more than 5 years. And it probably will for the rest of her life. After Holly passed the limo, she says she continued on Route 30. A few minutes later, she drove down the hill, stopped at the stop sign, and turned on her blinker in preparation for turning left onto 30A.
When we got to the bottom of the hill, we were sitting there talking. My daughter's on her cell phone looking down. And then all of a sudden we just heard this god-awful noise coming behind us that, I mean, to me, it sounded like a jet engine. It really did. It was such a loud whirling noise coming up behind me. I looked in the rear view mirror and I could see the limo coming up behind me in the rear view mirror. And I yelled at my daughter to hold on, not like it's going to make any difference, but just as she looked up and looked over at me, the limo just like flew past the driver's side door. It was going so fast that it was just like a white blur going right past the window.
Catastrophic Failure, the story of the Schoharie Limo Crash, premieres July 30th. You can find it on timesunion.com or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Do you have questions about any of our podcasts? Send us a message at podcast@timesunion.com. That's podcast@timesunion.com. The Eagle is a production of the Times Union. It's produced and edited by myself, Jessica Marshall, with help from the Times Union digital team and the newsroom. Our music is Flyin' by Top Floor. Special thanks to Casey Seiler, Erica Smith, and Larry Rulison for their contribution to this episode. Support for this podcast comes from CDTA. The Eagle, a Times Union podcast driven by CDTA.